Have you ever come across someone who seems like they truly don't need anybody? Someone who looks untouchable, self-contained, like nothing ever really gets to them? Maybe you've been in a relationship with someone like this. Maybe that person is you. From the outside, it looks like indifference. They can walk away without flinching. They stay calm in moments that would rattle most people. They keep everyone at arm's length and act as if feelings simply can't touch them. But here's what almost nobody realizes. That composure, that emotional distance, those walls built so high, none of it exists because they feel nothing. It exists because they feel far too much. And once you understand that, you'll never look at emotionally avoidant people the same way again. Behind the quiet, behind the retreating and shutting down, there's something they'll almost never say aloud. They only ever let their guard down completely for one very specific kind of person. If you've loved someone who pulls away like this, or if you recognize this pattern in yourself, what follows is worth paying attention to. It gets into the exact moment when the control cracks and something genuine starts to surface, a side of them most people never get to witness. Most people only ever meet the mask, the version built to keep the world at bay, but the rare few who manage to get past it end up holding a spot in that person's life that nothing else can replace. Stick with this because you're about to see avoidance in a completely different light. And if you've ever questioned whether a connection with someone like this was genuine, you're going to get your answer. One of the biggest lies people tell themselves is, "I don't need anyone." They say it like it's some kind of badge of honor, like needing love would somehow make them weak. This shows up constantly with avoidant people. They wear their independence like armor. They convince themselves they're perfectly fine on their own, that relying on people is risky, that connection is just optional, and that keeping distance is safer than opening themselves up to getting hurt again. If you've ever tried loving someone like this, you already know how hard it can be. It feels like no matter what you do, you can't quite get through. You could be sitting right next to them and still feel like there's a wall between you. They'll talk with you, spend time with you, and yet some part of them stays locked away, out of reach. What most people miss, though, is that this so-called independence isn't real strength. It's not genuine confidence. It's not proof they don't need anyone. It's a coping mechanism they built to survive. It usually started young, back when needing people led to disappointment, when being open led to pain, when love didn't feel like a safe place to be. They learned early that depending on someone could end in heartbreak, so they trained themselves to stop depending altogether. That habit doesn't disappear with age. It quietly follows them into adulthood, showing up in how they argue, how they distance themselves, how they love. Even if they keep repeating the same line, "I'm fine alone, I don't need anyone," they can't erase a basic truth. Every human being, regardless of attachment style, is wired for closeness. We're built to connect. Strip away the fear and the old stories and the walls, and even the most avoidant person is still craving connection somewhere underneath. They just don't know how to admit it. Sometimes they don't even recognize it in themselves. Watch closely and you'll notice the pattern. They come across as strong, unbothered, composed, but the moment emotions get too real, something shifts. Bring up feelings and they'll change the subject. Get too close and they'll suddenly create space. Mention commitment and they'll need room to breathe. To most people, this reads as coldness, but look past the surface and what you'll actually find is fear. It's not that they don't care, it's that being truly seen terrifies them. Here's the part that catches people off guard. They want love just as much as anyone else does. They crave it deeply. But the second they start to feel it building, panic sets in. Because love requires vulnerability, and vulnerability means risk. The risk of rejection, of loss, of getting hurt all over again. So rather than leaning into it, they retreat. They pull back and rebuild the walls even higher, and the world reads that as strength, as someone who's mastered being alone. But underneath, they're just as hungry for love as anyone else. That's exactly why the idea of the untouchable avoidant is a myth. The notion that they don't feel deeply, that they're too self-sufficient to fall in love, is simply not accurate. They want love badly. They just don't know what to do with it once it shows up. If you've ever gotten close to someone like this, you've likely seen the contradiction firsthand. One moment they're opening up, sharing something real, laughing, softening, letting you glimpse who they really are underneath. And right when you think the connection is solidifying, everything shifts. They go cold, they pull away. It's disorienting, and you start second guessing whether any of it was real. It was. That warmth, that laugh, that spark, that was the truest version of them. The distance that follows isn't the truth resurfacing. It's fear taking over, their old survival instincts kicking back in. They don't withdraw because they stopped caring. They withdraw because caring scares them. Here's the part that runs even deeper. Avoidant people spend their whole lives trying to outrun their own need for closeness. They deny it, bury it, distract themselves from it, but none of that makes it go away. It just pushes it below the surface, and buried feelings don't vanish. They resurface elsewhere. In overworking, in constant distraction, in staying perpetually busy, in chasing achievement as a substitute for real intimacy. They'll insist they're totally content being alone, but late at night, once things go quiet, there's a hollowness they can't quite fill. The handful of people who've genuinely gotten close to them can sense that emptiness, the loneliness they'd never admit to out loud. What's remarkable is that no matter how determined an avoidant person is to keep connection at bay, life occasionally hands them someone they simply can't push away. It doesn't happen often, but every so often they meet someone whose presence just feels safe, someone who doesn't chase or pressure, who just shows up steady and genuine. And that's when something shifts inside them, even if they can't fully explain it. For the first time in what might be years, they experience real connection, and because it's so rare, it stays with them permanently. They may never say it outright, they might even downplay it, but deep down they never forget it. So when people label avoidance as detached loners, they're only seeing the surface, the story built for survival. Underneath all of it, they want exactly what everyone wants: to be loved, to be understood, and to feel safe in someone's presence. They just haven't figured out how to let it happen without fear taking over first. They've spent so long defining themselves by their independence that opening up feels like breaking a rule they've followed their entire lives. And here's the part almost nobody catches. The very independence that makes them seem so unreachable is what makes it so powerful when they finally do connect. When someone who swore they'd never depend on anyone allows themselves to need something small, that moment is life-altering. When someone who has spent years fleeing intimacy finally stops running and lets a person stay close, that bond carries a weight words can't fully capture. It's stronger precisely because it was hard-won. It's deeper because letting it exist took genuine courage. That kind of connection stays with them permanently, even if they never admit it out loud. It shapes them quietly in ways they'll never fully put into words. So the next time you notice someone withdrawing, going cold, or seeming unreachable, remember it isn't because love means nothing to them. It's because love terrifies them. What looks like absence is actually fear. Fear of being truly seen, fear of getting hurt, fear of being vulnerable enough to need someone. Once you see it that way, once you stop reading their distance as rejection and start recognizing it as self-protection, everything shifts. Their withdrawal stops feeling personal. You start noticing the frightened kid hiding behind the grown-up exterior. And maybe you learn to approach them with patience instead of pressure, with understanding instead of pursuit. Because the truth is, avoidant people don't need fixing. What they need is to feel safe enough to stay. They need proof that closeness doesn't always end in pain, that love doesn't have to end in loss, and that needing someone isn't weakness, it's simply being human. That's the belief every avoidant secretly wishes they could hold on to. What looks like independence is really armor. They aren't fundamentally different from anyone else. They've just learned to protect themselves more heavily. And underneath that armor is the same universal truth we all carry: the need for connection, the hope of being loved, the desire to be truly known. They might resist that truth, fight against it even, but it never fully disappears. Not until they find the one person who makes it feel safe enough to finally set the walls down. They'll keep insisting they don't need anybody, but underneath they do. They always have. The reality is that most of the world will never actually see who an avoidant person really is. Only the guarded version stays visible to most. You could spend years around someone like this and still feel like a stranger in their world. It's disorienting. And it's easy to start blaming yourself, wondering if you're somehow not enough or doing something wrong. But the issue was never you. Avoidant people don't push others away because those people aren't worth their time. They do it because in their minds, closeness itself feels like danger. And yet, buried beneath all that self-protection, there's always room for one exception. It's rare, but when it happens, it changes everything. Every avoidant person, no matter how shut down they seem, has the potential to eventually meet someone who slips past their defenses, and it isn't because that person chased harder or pleaded for attention. That kind of pursuit actually pushes avoidant people further away. The reason one particular person gets through is simple. They don't set off the internal alarm. They don't trigger panic. They don't corner the avoidant emotionally. Instead, they create an entirely different experience, one calm enough, safe enough, and steady enough that the avoidant finally stops running. Think of it this way: someone who's been burned will avoid fire at all costs. But imagine they finally feel warmth without getting hurt. Something inside them starts to shift. They realize heat doesn't always have to burn. That's exactly what that rare person represents. It's not that they magically heal every wound overnight, it's that their presence simply doesn't set off alarm bells. They bring calm without demanding anything, love without smothering, honesty without drama. That specific mix, steady, genuine, low pressure, feels entirely unfamiliar to the avoidant, and it's exactly what starts melting the armor. Here's the irony. Most people who love an avoidant end up doing the opposite of what actually helps. They chase. They question everything. They ask for reassurance over and over. They beg for closeness, which is understandable because when you're pouring love into someone, you want to feel it coming back. But to an avoidant, that kind of behavior reads as a threat. It confirms their deepest fear, that intimacy is overwhelming and unsafe. The rare person who actually breaks through doesn't fall into that push-pull pattern. They stay grounded. They offer love without demanding it be returned on schedule. They give space without disappearing altogether. And for possibly the first time, the avoidant doesn't feel cornered. This isn't about passivity either. It's not about ignoring distance or pretending the coldness doesn't hurt. It's about authenticity. That rare person essentially communicates, "This is who I am. This is how I show up. I won't chase you, but I'm not going anywhere either." That balance of presence and boundaries creates something the avoidant has likely never encountered. And once that energy is present, something remarkable starts happening. Walls that once seemed permanent begin coming down, not all at once, but gradually. You'll notice it in small moments. They share a tiny detail about their day. They laugh more freely. Maybe their hand lingers in yours a second longer than usual. These aren't accidents. They're small signs that trust is quietly forming. If you're that rare person, you might not even realize how much you're changing them because avoidant people rarely announce, "I'm starting to trust you." But you'll feel it in the quiet thaw, in the warmth slipping through their usually cool exterior. Make no mistake, none of this comes easily for them. Every instinct is screaming at them to retreat because opening up is exactly what they've spent a lifetime avoiding. It feels like handing someone the keys to their most fragile parts. Yet they do it anyway, not because they've stopped being avoidant, but because something about this particular person feels worth the risk. That's precisely why this kind of bond is so rare. It doesn't happen with just anyone. You could be endlessly kind, patient, and loving, and still never reach that part of them because it isn't about effort. It's about energy. It's about whether your presence calms their fears instead of feeding them. When that rare person finally shows up, the avoidant senses it, even if they can't articulate it. At first, they'll resist. They'll test it, pulling close, retreating, then coming back again, essentially asking, "Can I trust this? Will you still be here if I step back?" And when that person remains steady, not chasing, not disappearing, just present, the avoidant slowly starts to believe that safety might actually be real. Once that belief takes root, everything begins to shift. It doesn't mean they suddenly become flawless. They'll still struggle, they'll still retreat sometimes, but something fundamental inside them has changed. They've discovered they can let someone close without losing themselves, that love doesn't have to spiral into chaos, that connection doesn't have to hurt, and once that door has opened, it never fully shuts again. The bond, messy or imperfect as it might be, remains. It becomes woven into who they are. What's beautiful is that none of this requires grand gestures or dramatic moments. It's built through the quiet consistency of trust, through presence that doesn't pressure, love that doesn't trap, and honesty that doesn't wound. When an avoidant finally meets someone who brings this kind of balance, it changes them permanently, because for the first time they stop running. That's the transformation nobody talks about. People assume avoidant individuals are hopeless, destined to always choose distance. But the truth is, they're simply waiting for someone steady enough, kind enough, and safe enough to restore their belief in connection. When they finally meet that person and let them in, it's never shallow or fleeting. It's not a curiosity or passing attraction. It's the start of one of the deepest bonds they'll ever form. Their walls might look unbreakable. Their silence might seem endless. The distance might feel permanent. But it only takes one person showing up differently for that to change entirely. The fortress starts collapsing piece by piece, because no matter how high the walls, even avoidant people are quietly searching for the one person who makes them stop running. When an avoidant person truly bonds, it's never casual. It's not just another relationship or a passing phase. For them, it's everything, because it's the very thing they feared most their entire lives. When they finally choose it, it's permanent. They don't open that door repeatedly, and they don't extend that level of trust freely. Understand that avoidant people build walls to survive. They've perfected the art of distance, learning to protect their hearts by keeping others out. So when they finally let those walls down, it isn't a minor event. It's an enormous risk, like handing over the most fragile part of themselves. But when they do it, it's because they found someone who feels genuinely safe. That bond runs deep and stays with them. People assume avoidant individuals can simply walk away easily. And yes, physically they might. They might withdraw or go quiet, but emotionally, once they've truly bonded, they never fully let go. They can't. That connection becomes part of who they are. No matter how much distance or silence follows, they still carry it. This isn't about obsession or control, it's about permanence. Once an avoidant person bonds authentically, it rewires something inside them, reshaping how they experience closeness from that point forward. And here's what makes it so powerful. That bond isn't rooted in attraction or convenience, it's rooted in safety, built on the peace they felt the moment they finally stopped running. That experience leaves a permanent imprint. They might go on to meet other people and start new relationships, but if you were the one who gave them that sense of safety, nothing that comes after will ever feel quite the same. They might try to recreate it, but they won't be able to, because it was never just about who you were. It was about how you showed up in a way that reached their deepest fears without triggering them. That kind of alignment doesn't happen twice. It's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of bond. But don't misunderstand. This doesn't mean everything becomes flawless. They may still struggle. They may still withdraw occasionally because growth takes time for them too. But if you were the person who made them feel safe enough to stop hiding, you've left a permanent mark. They might still fight the urge to protect themselves, but underneath all of that, the bond remains intact. It doesn't vanish because of an argument. It doesn't fade with distance. It doesn't disappear when things get difficult. That connection becomes part of their identity, which is why, if you've ever been that person for an avoidant, you might feel confused when they pull away. You might wonder how they could retreat if the bond was genuinely real, whether any of it actually mattered. But here's the truth. You can't measure the strength of their bond by how they behave in moments of fear. You have to look at the bigger picture. Because even when they withdraw, even when they hide, even when they tell themselves none of it was real, they always circle back to that inner truth. It was real, it still is, and it always will be. The rare person who forms a genuine bond with an avoidant becomes their benchmark. Every future connection gets measured against that one relationship that actually broke through. Most people will never reach that depth, not because they weren't good enough, but because an avoidant simply can't recreate that specific kind of trust easily. It isn't about replacing you. It's that once they felt real safety with someone, they can't convince themselves otherwise anymore. They no longer remember what it feels like without it. That's why the bond lasts a lifetime. There's something almost sacred in that. Picture spending a lifetime guarding yourself against love, avoiding vulnerability, keeping everyone at arm's length, and then imagine meeting the one person who changes all of that permanently. That's not simply a relationship, that's a defining turning point in an entire life. Avoidant people don't bond casually, and when they finally do, it lasts. Because it isn't only about the other person, it's about them overcoming their own walls to let someone in. That kind of transformation can't be reversed. If you've ever been that rare person for someone, you might not even realize the significance of what you did. You may think you were simply being yourself, that nothing you did was extraordinary, but to them, you were the exception. You proved that intimacy doesn't have to equal pain, and because of that, you hold a place in their life no one else can take. Avoidant people never truly forget. They may struggle to move forward even when they try. They might appear detached on the outside, but quietly, they carry that bond with them for years. Once they've trusted someone enough to form that connection, it becomes permanently woven into them, no longer something they can choose to undo. So, if you've ever wondered whether you mattered, whether your connection with an avoidant person was genuine, or whether you imagined the whole thing, hear this clearly. It was real. It ran deeper than you realized. It was lasting. They may never say it in words, they may never express it in obvious ways, but internally they know. They know you got past the walls. They know you gave them safety. And they know that bond will last a lifetime. Here's the part most people struggle to accept. Most will never witness this side of an avoidant person. They'll never be the one who breaks through, never hold that permanent place. And that has nothing to do with being unlovable or unworthy. It's simply that avoidant people don't let most people get close enough to earn that depth of trust. That bond is the rare exception, not the norm. For most people who interact with someone avoidant, the relationship stays surface-level, distant, and guarded. If you've loved an avoidant person but never saw them fully open up, it's easy to feel like you weren't enough. But that isn't about your worth. It's about their fear. Avoidant people enter relationships already half-guarded. They expect disappointment. They believe depending on anyone is inherently risky. So no matter how much love you offer, most of it doesn't fully land, like pouring water over stone. The surface gets wet, but nothing actually soaks in. Not because you weren't enough, but because the stone itself resists absorption. An avoidant person has spent so long protecting themselves that it takes something truly exceptional to break through. That's why most people only ever encounter the surface-level version, charming yet distant, fun yet guarded, seemingly invested yet holding back. It's frustrating because you can sense there's more beneath the surface, yet no matter how hard you try, you can't quite reach it. That leaves people questioning their own worth, wondering if maybe they just weren't special enough. But it was never about being special. It's about safety. Safety is the key that unlocks the door for someone avoidant. Most people respond to distance by chasing harder, asking more questions, trying twice as hard, and that pursuit feels suffocating to an avoidant person. It confirms every fear they carry, that intimacy is pressure, that closeness is dangerous, that letting someone in comes at the cost of their independence, so they retreat even further. Only the rare person manages to break through, not because they're somehow better, but because they respond in an entirely different way. They don't chase. They don't pressure. They don't beg. They simply hold steady. By doing this, they create something an avoidant person has genuinely never experienced before, a space where connecting with someone doesn't cost them their sense of self. That's the real difference maker. Most people simply don't know how to stay consistent without giving away too much of themselves. They don't know how to be present without also being pushy. They don't know how to hold on to their own boundaries without walking away entirely. That's exactly why the deep, lasting bond an avoidant person forms is so uncommon. Think of it like a lock with countless keys tried against it, but only one that actually fits. Until they meet that particular key, they stay closed off. For most people who cross paths with someone avoidant, that real connection simply never happens. The avoidant person might smile, engage on a surface level, maybe even share moments of closeness for a while, but the walls never fully come down. Living behind those walls takes a toll on the other person too. You pour your heart into someone who can never quite meet you there, and that's painful. It's natural to start doubting yourself, but their difficulty bonding has nothing to do with your worth. It's about the emotional prison they built around themselves long before you came along. If you happen to be the rare person who actually broke through those walls, that changes everything. Most people never get to see an avoidant laugh without holding back, open up about their fears, or love without hesitation. Most never experience that sense of permanence with them, so if you were the one who reached them, understand this clearly. It wasn't just another relationship. It was their once-in-a-lifetime bond. It was the exact moment their entire understanding of love changed for good.